Okay, welcome everybody for this executive meeting. Do we have any apologies? Nope, we're all assembled. Thank you so much. Disclosable pecuniary interests and other disclosable interests. Anybody got those to do? Nope. Okay. Can we go through the confirmation of the minutes of the last meeting? Anybody get any comments or otherwise about them? I'll be happy that the minutes reflect what was then. Okay. We're going to propose that or accept them, and yep, we'll be happy with that. We'll accept that.
See the cards. See cards. See cards.
Okay. Chair's announcements. I don't have any. We did have public participation, but the lady's not here at the moment, so we'll carry on and maybe she'll come in later. Okay, so the first, item 6 is revenue and capital monitoring. The report covers the expenditure of 24-25 against the approved revenue capital budgets. And we have the projected end of year outturn for each service and budget is shown in table section 3. And we've got a positive performance from development management, as you note. Investment income continues to outperform and has exceeded our budget expectations. This has been on for a little while with the threat that we're going to have interest rates coming down, but they've actually held up. So the current projection is for the end of year underspend of 993,000. Business rates income is projected to be 2.04 million, and some of which this is subject, of course, to appeals, as it's always caveated each year. The cash position snapshot can be seen in the table, and note that actually through the year it fluctuates. So projecting a balance of £35 million against last year's 30 million at the end of the year projected. The investments interest is shown in Appendix B, and we have an end of year 1.9 million return on that in excess of the budget figure which we had at 1.2 million budgeted or expected in the budget figures. 34.4 million sits in short-term deposit in the money market, and we have a property fund of 9 million, diversified income fund of 7 million, and both of these have a capital growth element. So the capital element now is, turning to that, is summarised in the table in the report, which does not include committed expenditure. Earmarked reserves and section 106 are tabled in Appendix C, and that is the report. Does anybody got any questions on that? Peter.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, my compliments to Mr. Baldwin's team for the Treasury management side of this, which as usual is exemplary and has given us a heavy windfall, which is always delightful. On the other side of the coin, however, perhaps you, Chair, as portfolio holder, could talk to the lower than expected numbers for council tax and business rates and for the waste and recycling side.
Thank you, Chair. I'll do waste and recycling first. Waste and recycling is largely due to the need to recruit 3 additional members of staff for the refuse recycling round and the green waste round, which we will pick up in the budget, but also some higher than expected vehicle maintenance costs are driving that overspend. In terms of revenues and benefits, the council tax and NDR line, it's purely because One of the government grants that we used to receive has now come out of that service, and is picked up in other government funding elsewhere. So it shows up on the face of this table as an overspend, but actually we do receive the money elsewhere, but within the government grant element of what we receive.
Lovely, thank you.
And Natalie?
Thank you, Chair. I know that the report's just for noting, but I did want to reiterate what Peter said about the work of Andy and his team, and for producing such a clear report with very positive news in it. Some of our noisy neighbours will be looking on green with envy, I'm sure, but these things don't happen by accident. And although we've benefited from some sound financial investments, there is hard work that's gone into this work for the last, before I was elected, I'm sure there's always been a prudent financial plan. We are financially sustainable, which is something to be really proud of. And it's really good to see increased income from development management. And thank you to the planning team for turning that around. I did have two questions, but Peter's asked one of them. So I'll just ask the first one, which is about the overspend on housing, which I'm taking an educated guess might be associated to temporary accommodation costs. But it'd be good to have that clarified and to understand how we're going to mitigate against further costs in relation to that. Thanks.
Chair, on Appendix A, members will see it's only an overspend of £6,000. I say only an overspend. I'm glad it's not my money, which is a very small overspend. Yes, there will be some temporary accommodation costs that we're unable to recover through housing benefit, and that will be driving that overspend.
Thank you, Chair. Just to answer Councillor McVeigh's point about future mitigations, obviously temporary accommodation is an area of focus that we'll be exploring through the portfolio, and particularly looking at how we can drive down costs, but equally also increase standards of accommodation. So I would obviously welcome the input of members through PDP and scrutiny and other channels to help us make some good decisions around that.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? Okay, so this is a revenue capital monitoring fund noting. We have public participation. If we can move back an item now that the lady is arrived. So, you've got Emma, you want to?
Sorry, the motorway was shut, which is why I asked.
Okay. Well, if you give us.
Have I missed public participation or am I?
The chairman's going back to that. You take a seat.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for allowing me to speak, and apologies that I'm a few minutes late getting here. So I prepared a speech to read out tonight, but it just pretty much went over what I said last time. So I thought I'd try and just tell it from the heart and explain how the changes to agricultural property relief and business property relief are going to affect farmers in the Malvern Hills district. Farmers are frightened, farmers are scared, farmers are sitting on high value assets which they never intend to sell, and overnight on the 30th of October the Chancellor overturned our thinking. So everything that is valued over £1 million will now be subject to a 20% tax. We've tried to engage with Treasury. Our President has met with the Chancellor. There was a big meeting with the Treasury today, and the Treasury officials have dug their heels in, and the Labour government have dug their heels in, and they won't move. This shouldn't be about party politics. This transcends the boundaries of politics. This is about right and wrong. When Keir Starmer spoke at the NFU conference 2 years ago, he said food security is national security, and he's absolutely right, it is. As a nation, we must be able to feed ourselves. And I think the point I'd like to make to you today is that if farmers are forced to sell their land, we won't be able to produce that food. We have over 70 million people on this small island currently, and world populations are due to go up to 9.5 billion by 2050. All that's going to happen is farmers are going to be forced to sell the land, produce less food, yeah, sure, we could rely on imports, but that's not really the solution. So I would just urge you as a council to reconsider the motion that was put before you and, you know, just think outside the box of party politics and outside the box. The way we're going to change this is by Labour politicians bringing about change within their party. So I've met with the two Labour MPs in Worcestershire, Chris Bloor and Tom Collins. We met with them in London on the 19th of November, and we have met with them out on farm. And privately, they get it, they understand it. I met with Tom Collins again yesterday. I had 2 hours with him. I asked his advice and said, well, what can we do? How can we bring about this change? While they privately agree with us and they understand the issue, they're frightened to move outside the rules of their party. They're frightened of losing the Labour Party whip, and they are struggling to have their voice heard. The only way we can bring about change is by organisations like yourselves, councils across the country, writing to the government and urging them to reconsider. So the NFU has done a lot of work on this. We've done some analysis. We have given solutions to the Labour Party, and they refuse to engage with us. They refuse to listen. Another point I'd like to make is that growth is very important. We have to plug the gap in public finances. And the way that we grow is we invest in businesses. Businesses become more productive. Every farmer in Malvern Hills district at the moment is hunkering down. They're not expanding, they're not investing, they're not innovating, they're not buying more tractors, they're not buying more machinery, they're not investing in any part of their business, because the more successful that business is, the greater the inheritance tax bill they face. So could I just urge you to do all you can within your power to speak to politicians and to ask them to engage with us, and we will come offering solutions, because at the moment there's a brick wall, and I don't know how we can get round this. My big worry is that farmers should be united, but we are beginning to see divisions. Some farmers want the NFU to be more militant. We never go down the direct action route because we always believe that talking is better than direct action. But they're talking about blockading food now. They're talking about boycotting food distribution centres. One of my members was talking about driving a slurry tanker. You know, these are tactics that won't win us any friends, that won't get this one, but it'll cause an enormous amount of disruption. So if there's anything you can do to resolve this, or to help resolve it, or bring about any influence that you have, I would urge you to back this motion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Emma, for expressing that, the issue so clearly, what the problems are that farmers are facing. And I think many of us understand that, actually, and we're very sympathetic to try to get the government to change its mind. So we'll have the motion later on and we'll see what happens.
Thank you.
Revenue and capital budgets. So this is dealing with the setting of the budgets and the level of council tax, and follows on from the medium-term financial plan, which we put through at the end of last year. So on the revenue side, we aim, as we have done, to have a balanced budget, maintaining a general fund balance of greater than, or equal to even, greater than £3 million, which will mitigate against any future funding risks. However, there are savings that we will need to find going forward, and where these come from is efficiencies, getting more from our investment income, and income that we generate from services. Our aim is to keep the council tax as low as possible and to maintain capital reserves. That's basically the main element of our revenue. We want to avoid borrowing. So in this document, there are assumptions about the impact of costs. There's a 3% pay costs increase assumed in the document. Other cost increases are 2%, and the pension contributions are pretty static, same every year, 17.6%. We are assuming that the bandy increases this year in council tax will be zero, so we're not proposing to raise council tax this year. There will be a zero increase on that. Appendix A shows the proposed revenue budget overall. Appendix B shows the budget increases £110,000, an additional refuse and recycling round, one extra green waste operative. Appendix C shows no service reductions and income generation identified £200,000. 140,000 of that is leisure, 20,000 from commercial waste, and £40,000 identified for garden waste. Appendices D and E are spending plans by service area, if you would want to look at that. Our contribution to the shared services costs are factored in and agreed by the Joint Management Board. Financing, business rates, £1.98 million baseline. The general fund needs to be robust enough to cover variability risk. The new homes bonus, 534,000 or 535,000 rounded up, is confirmed. A new unring fence extended producer responsibility indicative 770,000 or 769 actually. The funding guarantee grant, 1.2 million, is a one-off to be added to priorities reserves. Council taxable has increased to 33,558 council tax base. We propose no increase, as I said, in the council tax, and we remain one of the lowest council tax councils in the country. The precepting authorities are in the process of determining their precept levels, and we'll await this information so that we can then determine the overall council tax and set the overall council tax for the year ahead. Appendix F shows the capital programme and financing, and capital spending will be financed by capital receipts, government grants and reserves. There is no need to use external borrowing, so we meet our plan, the basis, our philosophy of avoiding borrowing going forward, and the capital programme is shown in table 12.1. Note that the expenditure is greatest over the next 2 years, as we've identified in there, and at the end of the 5 years period, the replacement fund will have reduced to be 1,481,000. So it is important to continue to add to replacement fund each year and take a long-term view. The earmarked reserves position is shown in Appendix G. Cash management, we forecast to have £35 million, and that covers the budget setting. Has anybody got any questions on that? Peter?
Thank you, Chair. There's a little niggling voice in my head that worries this isn't really a terribly adventurous or dynamic budget. I note that we're putting 500,000 quid into reserves. We still have £1 million in reserves for infrastructure items, and I remind you, sir, that 3 months ago you couldn't tell me what that money was going to be used for, so I'm hoping you can tell me now. And in general, I can't help wondering if any consideration was given to even lowering the council tax rather than just keeping it flat. It does seem to be business as usual rather than doing a bit of innovative thinking. Just my observations.
Thank you, Peter. Could I ask Andy to respond to the first point?
I think they're largely political questions, if I'm honest. In terms, yeah, I think those are political questions, sorry.
Okay, we haven't had, on the council tax discussions, I think you were there when we discussed some of that, if you remember, and we came to the view that instead of with the change into how the unitary is going forward and what's going to happen in the future and the time frame over which we're now looking at the district council, it seemed right that we shouldn't increase council tax since we had a good, strong financial position. We didn't have any discussion about actually reducing council tax, so the answer to that is no, we didn't. I haven't got any particular view about, at the moment, about how we're going to use the reserve money. I think that will depend on what we do, I think, looking forward, going into the unitary phase and to see what happens in that. And those discussions are not yet complete as to what happens, and the decisions are not yet made.
Chair, I'm going to come back since you actually mentioned me personally there. You're quite right. When we first looked at this, which was before the government made its determinations, I think we were all quite pleased to look at a flat council tax. If I'm quite frank, I would have looked for something a little more innovative, bearing in mind that we have considerable reserves, which are Malvern Hills taxpayers, council taxpayers' money, and I am personally somewhat loath to hand over a penny piece more than we have to any new unitary. So perhaps we could come up with something a little more exciting, and some plans to do whatever that £1 million is supposed to be doing, because we're a year, no, in fact more like 18 months down the line, and there's still nothing there to use that rather large pot of money. I'm not expecting you to give me an answer to that now, but it would be nice in 3 months' time or whenever we next meet to have at least some kind of solution, sir. Oh, and I apologise for Mr Baldwin if he had heart failure when I suggested reducing council tax.
Okay, Jenny, you've got...
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to give a point of view as a portfolio holder. I mean, I think, first of all, our residents will be delighted we're not putting council tax up, but I take the point is, you know, what are we doing with the funds we've got available? Just to offer some reassurances, there are absolutely plans in the pipeline, and there'll be a report coming next month, for example, to exec around a community infrastructure fund to enable us to invest back in our communities and start thinking about, you know, what we want to support them with to become sustainable and resilient for the future, particularly occupying a space for a while whilst I'm sure the new unitary gets into action. So there absolutely are plans afoot, and I'm sure each portfolio holder could probably talk about those now, but I'm aware we've got a session booked in with both scrutiny and that will come through this process that will look very closely at not only what are those plans, what are the costings, but more importantly, what are the actions and outputs that we can deliver in that time frame. So hopefully that gives you some reassurances, and I certainly hope that when I do present you with a report that has quite a hefty cost attached to it, we'll be able to have such a healthy conversation.
Thanks. Yeah, just on that. So you'll know that the leader took over November, I think it was, and we've been going through a process of looking at the revised council plan. What are our strategic goals for that plan going forward? I mean, one of the things about the ability to say we don't need to raise the council tax is because we've had prudent planning and we've done things carefully and methodically, and that comes to spending money as well. So we're not coming in and saying, we've got these great ideas, let's just go and spend loads and loads of money. What we're saying is, what are the council's objectives? And we'll be agreeing those at council. What are the, let's engage with our residents to understand where they want us to invest their money, because at the end of the day, it is their money. And then come up with a process to prioritise those and agree between us as a council which funds we want to put, which things we want to put funds to. So again, this is a very serious process about delivering real benefit, which is what we said we were going to do when we took over. Very real benefit to our residents, but done in a controlled way, a managed way that delivers the most value for our residents. As far as the budget is concerned, we have got sufficient money to not raise the council tax. That is the prudent thing to do.
Okay, Natalie?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I've got a few questions, but I don't know how you want me to table them. One's a general one and then a few specifics. Do you want the general one first, obviously? In paragraph 3.5, there's mention of ONS scrutinising this budget. at their last meeting, and that we should expect a report to this committee on their findings, but I didn't see that as part of this pack. So I'm just wondering when we do get that report. That's quite a general one. Do you want to start with that one? Yes, when are we going to get the ONS considerations of the budget that we said, it says in the report we would get? Paragraph 3.5.
Sorry, I missed the ONS. I thought this was in the ONS that we've just been through.
You'd be glad to know I was at ONS. There were no findings from ONS on the budget, so there is nothing to report here.
Okay, so that perhaps should have been amended before these papers came out. There's specific mention of the extended producer responsibility grant, and I know what it's for, but it says it's not ring fenced, and it's quite a substantial amount of money. So I'm just wondering what it can be spent on if it's not ring fenced.
Absolutely anything, but as it's within the budget that's within you today, it will be spent on providing the services that are contained in the budget. So we cannot spend it on something on top of what's in the budget because it's in the budget today.
Thank you. And then finally, without knowing what the new council priorities are, and we're being asked to approve a 1.6 million transfer into the new priorities fund, but I don't know if that's enough if I don't know what the priorities are, and I think this is a bit cart before the horse, if I'm honest with you. So can you give us some clues about what the priorities are, please, because I don't know what they are and whether 1.6 million is enough.
So the council's plan will be coming to the March meetings. The priorities are largely the same as they were, although some of the specific actions will have been amended and revised and updated. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think some of the policy development panels have already seen elements of their plan that they're interested in. So you'll be aware of the current plan, and it's broadly the priorities are the same, but with some revised actions. And I think, as has been suggested already, there's a report coming to the next meeting as well, which accompanies that around the community infrastructure plan investment.
Thank you, Chairman. Very quick one on the council tax and not putting it up. There is no indication that we'd be penalised as a council if we don't put it up by a minimum amount. There's nothing that would central government could say, well, you're obviously running your reserves down, so therefore we're not going to support you as we were before. There's no indication that we would be penalised by being so prudent. Thank you.
I haven't heard anything like that at all, so no indication whatsoever.
Just to probably help you a little bit there, we have received, I think it's in the order of £800,000 for Section 106 for new housing. And if you recall, in the last budget or the last stuff last year, we were not expecting, and we were categorically told, as we have for the last 2 years, I think, Andy might convince me on that, that they were going to stop the new homes bonus. But in fact, so far they haven't. So we've got £800,000 towards what I call the households within the Malvern Hills district.
Okay, no further comments. So this is to be recommended. Can we have a vote on recommending this to go to council for approval?
Can we have a sec? We've got a second, Chair.
Oh, can we second that? Chairman.
Thank you. Those in favour? That's unanimous, Chair.
the next item is the Q3 quarterly progress report. SWDPR submitted for examination 27th of September. Initial and supplementary questions and further work on evidence base responded to by the end of the calendar year, 31st of December. And I think, as we all know, the hearings are actually starting on March the 4th, going through to April. 340 matters, issues and questions received by the South Worcestershire Councils for response, as was by the 1st of February. We'll maybe get some sort of comment on where we are with that. Statements of common ground to be submitted by the 11th of February, and the revised NPPF was published in December last year. The 5-year housing land supply published. The South Worcestershire Council's 5-year supply can only be delivered for the next 2.06 years. Travellers DBD inspectors have updated the GTAA, the re-intensification of existing sites, and the examination will determine whether this DBT is subsumed into the SWDPR, or it will be actually a separate document. Unemployment levels in the district, 1,160 claimants in the district. We've got, that's 2.6%, and those are aged from 16 to 64. This is 0.2% higher than this time last year, so there's a slight, very small tick up percentage-wise on that. Expected really as the earnings thresholds really has come in, and this was increased in May, so I think probably what you're seeing there is the impact of that earnings threshold being increased, and that's impacting the figures. The services overall, performance is on track on services. Highlight the positive performances that the planning applications have improved, they determined within the timescales and are at or above our local stretch targets. The collection targets for council tax and business rates are also doing well, and the household refuse collection and recycling amounts are high and doing also very well. Homelessness, the numbers actually have turned red, 31 this year to date versus the actual target, the annual target of 30. So we've actually just gone above that figure. No doubt this is a consequence, I think, of the cost of living impact hitting people. Also due to applicants, I think, taking longer to receive offers from registered providers. So there's some sort of relationship there with homelessness and the offers coming through. Staff sickness has also has also gone into the red, and this was an issue I think that's been ongoing for the last few years, and I think all members of the council have expressed some concern about that. Are we doing the right thing with regard to that and dealing with it? And I think the answer has sort of come back, or our understanding is that the figures are actually skewed by a couple of long-term severe health issues, so the figures are impacted on that, and that is the main reason why it's skipped into and maintained into the red. So there's long-term health issues affecting that figure. Our human resources are working to support individuals who are on long-term sickness, and we've had special discussions with them, trying to get occupational therapy in to help them get back and get their health back in again and get back to work, as I guess they all would want to do. The short-term absence figures are stable, and really that's the skewed. Really, it's coming through on the skewed figures on pushing in as a result of the long-term severe health issues. Planning application times validation fell slightly and is below our local stretch target, so that's gone also into the red. And the review of validation services completed and a draft action plan is aimed at achieving local stretch targets. Building control plans checked within time fell, but they're rated again, red against the stretch target. Impacted by long-term illness, absence of regulation, fallout from Grenfell. So there's that. I think that was mentioned. I think at the last quarterly progress report as well, that there is an impact from Grenfell coming through into the regulations hitting these figures. So it's been addressed as a matter of urgency. There's a new rolling 5-year plan, and that's kind of seen in Appendix 2. That's all on track. And the residence survey is there. We've had responses, 1,665, which I think is the second highest from recently. I think we had 1,700 or something as the highest figure. This is the second highest figure of responses that we've had. Overall, the fluctuations indicate either a fall or no significant change from previous years. And compared to the national picture, we outperform the national average. It's noteworthy that the Corporate Peer Challenge expressed admiration for the high levels of resident satisfaction. So I think they were particularly impressed by what we're doing along those lines. The priorities are that we coming through the resident survey as community and public transport as a priority. Crime and feeling safe, people think that's an important issue that we are concerned about. We want to revitalise the town centres, and skills and training apprenticeships are important to our residents as another high priority. There is a worry about the litter and fly tipping. That's something that also they want to have a look at. And also road improvements is an important thing for residents. So these have actually all informed our 5-year plan, and that's essentially covering our quarterly performance report. Can I open up to any questions about that?
Thank you. You mentioned the corporate peer challenge. Do you know when the results of that are going to come out? I haven't missed it, have I? Okay.
No, we're still waiting, through your chair, we're still waiting for the final report any day now.
Jules?
Yeah, it's a comment rather than a question. Just to say, and I'm sure David will confirm this or otherwise, that in terms of the validation figures that are still showing red, Kieran and the team are doing an awful lot of work to get those up to target. One of the key things that affects those figures is that the team tend to keep applications live, even that, well, say live, they're not quite live till they're validated, but they're on their books, even if the submission from the applicant or the agent is not good enough. So I think one of the changes they're going to make is that actually if something isn't good enough and isn't going to get good enough, they will send them back and stop them rather than keep them on the books. So if you keep them on the books, it shows all the time that you've got these long-term applications that aren't getting anywhere. Whereas what really should happen is they should be sent back to the agent or the applicant, and that I understand is going to happen. So I think that'll make a big difference.
Thanks, Jules. Peter?
Thank you, Chair. I'm glad to see that we have a heavy preponderance of green on this, but I do, I'm afraid, have a black cloud for you. And I promised I'd raise this because yesterday I had a note from a resident regarding planning, and the germane bit is our issues with planning are lack of responsiveness, lack of communication, too little collaboration, and the drip feeding of objections and issues. We fully understand that planning has an important job to do, but my goodness, do they make it a protracted and frustrating process along the way. Now, Chair, I believe the background for that is that the person concerned has been dealing with 3 planning officers at various times, not necessarily one after the other, dipping in and out, and in discussing an application, repeated processes were going round where new things would crop up rather than being presented in one go. So it's a shame that the Director of Planning isn't here unless he's behind me. But I do think, and I'm looking here for the portfolio holder for planning, that a little more coordination and structure might be called for. And if we do have issues with staff, as I'm sure we do most of the time, then how can we ensure that these are not exacerbated as we go forward towards a unitary when, and I'm hypothesising here, morale and willingness to go the extra mile might be a little lower than otherwise expected.
Thank you, Peter. And Jules. Interesting. I offer, and always have done, as portfolio, that anybody who has a problem with any planning application or anything to do with planning can contact me. That still stands. Whoever it is you're talking about has not contacted me. You haven't contacted me over this as far as I'm aware. So I can't really respond without knowing facts. It's very interesting that this has been brought up, and I will read out in a moment what I've written, and you might find it quite interesting. You've also heard from Jules that you know, we are doing reasonably well, and what have you, but I'll read this out first so that you can sort of see how I'm looking at this. I have also, just as a matter of interest, been in consultation with one particular planning application who eventually the local ward members got hold of me and I got hold of the applicant. Unfortunately, he also wrote, or fortunately, he wrote to Vic. So he is aware of him, and so is Ian MacLeod, and so are a few others, which is fine, and they also sent it, believe it or not, to the leader of the council, Tom Wells, and that was sent this year. So that's been rectified as well. This report, just for clarification, you'll see under the paragraph Appendix 1A that the performance in dealing of determining planning applications has increased. And again, Councillor Paul Cummins, Councillor Julie Wood, Councillor Dean Clark and myself are having regular 2 monthly meetings with Kieran Power over this and being updated on the progress of the full planning department and everything that goes with it. At our latest meeting, held on the 28th of January, it was very positive with our performance figures increasing. There have also been the structural alteration and the introduction of the housing team for planning. This has made a marked increase in the decisions for householders, and as I understand, also a large decrease in the number of complaints on this topic made directly to the council. In fact, over the last 2 months, I haven't heard of one. So that's quite interesting as well. Unfortunately, as has been stated by Julie Wood, again, there is a slight blip in the validation of planning, and this is being addressed to try and get these figures increased by the respective managers. And Julie's already pinched my forte that they put in a load of rubbish, so that's fine. You will also see in the not too distant future that applications that are submitted will, as Jules said, have to be correct. But it's also, I believe, they are working on an AI system to validate these documents that are submitted, and they will be returned fairly quickly if that is the case, and the sooner that's in, probably the better. I'd also like to thank all the officers within the planning department for their effort and being well above the determined rates as stated in the national targets. Just one question that was asked early on was about the SWDPR. The questions were asked by the inspectors, I'll call them planning inspectors, and they were all responded. They had up until the 31st of December to respond to them. They actually responded to all of the questions before Christmas bar one. The one that wasn't answered had to be submitted by the 31st of December, and that was the transport plan, and that was submitted between Christmas and New Year. So again, all of those people that work, most of them aren't here, they're over in Wychavon, but they're employed by us and Wychavon. They deserve a vote of thanks because they got everything in, and having that quantity of questions thrown at you with less than 3 weeks to respond, I think was an absolutely amazing task. So I thank them, and I'm sure that you will too. Quite open to any questions if there is any on the planning. I'll leave others to sort anything else out.
Jules.
Just another point of clarification, really. It says in 4.1, little 2, that the list of 340 questions been sent to the SWCs for a response by the 11th of February. We can say that 11th of February was met, literally officers working all over the weekend to try and get those questions referred back. And David, that's what they did, didn't they? So they should really be congratulated, because literally the staff worked far beyond the calls of duty, I think.
Well, over the last 18 months, as far as I'm aware, they haven't missed any deadlines from anybody regarding the SWDPR, and I think it's fantastic.
Natalie.
Yeah, thank you. It is reassuring to see steady performance, pretty much across the board, with a few familiar exceptions. And just picking up on comments made by David and Jules, I really wish that recommendation 3 was recommendation 1, because we've got exceptional staff here that are really invested in the success of our organisation, and they really do deserve a big thank you, especially recent events with SWDPR, but there are others as well. Anyway, an observation and a request, please, in relation to Appendix 2, the 5-year plan progress. I think there's a small typo in priority 2, because it says housing support fund, which I think should be household support fund, unless the name's changed without me knowing. And the request. So it also mentions that there was a roundtable event, and I'd be interested to see the recommendations that were made as a result of that roundtable event, either as a report to us as an executive committee or as a theme for discussion at ONS. I wonder if that's either of those are possible, please.
Jen at the back.
Yeah.
Just wait for a mic, John.
It's working now. Thank you. Thank you. So just on the round table. So we did host that as a Chatham House Rules discussion in order to draw out some sort of confidential and kind of open conversation from the registered providers. However, we have drawn together the kind of general themes from that session, and so I'm certainly happy. We shared some of those early themes with PDP last time, but I'm certainly happy to share with any members that are interested the kind of key themes that came out of that, and we're now working on a kind of action plan of how we might be able to address some of those themes. So it might be a bit high level and not attributable to those who said things, but certainly the themes we can share.
Okay, Dean?
Validations, needs pointing out, actually don't actually alter the figures at the end. So the people who put in a bad application at the beginning, working now, who don't put in a good application that can be validated easily at the beginning, aren't necessarily held up because, again, of the efficiency of our officers who are managing to get these improved figures through all the time, which are not only above our stretch targets, but we have to remember those are way above the national stretch targets. There's going to be a point pretty soon where they're not going to be able to improve much, I think. The reality of the odd application going wrong, that's always going to happen in some cases. One of the things that Kieran pointed out is we're quite aware that some of these delays are because of the agents, where we send a response to the agent and it sits on the agent's desk for a while. David's got the answer to that. We send it to the customer as well.
Yeah, sorry, I forgot that bit. That's something that we discussed. Yes, because there are so many agents that aren't doing anything or contacting their original person who's employing them, we had at our meeting decided that it would be a good idea when we send a response back to the agent that we also send it to the applicant, so that the applicant knows that we are responding, or the planning department, not the planning, the validation people are responding, that there's a document missing or something like that, and then it's up to the pair of them to argue it out and get it submitted. And that way, with a bit of luck, it should come in an awful lot quicker.
Chair, can I just come back on that point, and Dean's as well? This is a two-way street. I'm afraid I can think of several applications that have been referred to me where the planning department has requested that deferrals be made, and then come back and said that they want a response from the agent within 3 or 4 working days. And it's just not reasonable to say, can we have an extra 20 working days, and then you've got to turn around like that. So it's got to be equal rights in this respect, I would suggest, Councillor Harrison. I do have concerns that we are not actually playing on a level playing field every time when we're dealing with applicants. And regarding your earlier speech, I think we have to remember that applicants are very reluctant to complain when they're putting in a planning application because, doubtless unreasonably, they're concerned that they will prejudice their application. So we need to keep. We know the process. We understand the process. And yes, I could have come to you yesterday, but the applicant didn't want me to because they were genuinely worried that that would mess up their application, having already taken a lot of time and been delayed by changes in planning officers. So let's keep a realism level and keep focusing on what the public experience is, not what we think, please.
I think I can assure, on behalf of Ian, who unfortunately can't be here this evening, assure all members that non-material planning considerations will not enter into any planning decision. However, I understand the complainant's request to remain anonymous, but Councillor Watley, if you want to share in Ian's absence any details with me so that we can look at individual cases and to see if there's any wider lessons learned, I'm more than happy to do that, Councillor Watley.
Perhaps we can do that offline, but I don't want to raise that at the moment. I'd really just want to make it a general awareness that the public do not necessarily see things how we see them.
We'll move on to the next. Oh, the recommendation. Yeah. I propose this item. If we've got any seconder, Jeremy? Yep. Okay. We take a vote on that.
Thank you. Chair.
Right, the next item is the Treasury and Management Investment Strategy. So we can have a look at that. Right. Treasury, this is the management and how we manage our investments and what we do about it. So the three categories I think that are outlined in the report are the Treasury, management and investments. Service, we get service investments, and we've also got the possibility of commercial investments. We've got a cash surplus which will come from council tax and grants. We could have reserves for the future and other taxes for local authorities and central government. £40 million is the balance, and that actually gives the yield, with a yield of 3%, £1.2 million. The cash portfolio is managed in-house, short-term with HSBC, CCLA, the charities, council and local authorities, security and liquidity actually being a priority. So that's how we look at the cash. It has to be secure and liquid, and there are no risks, or very little risk, I suppose, no risk taken with the cash. The expected return is £1.923 million, which equates to a 4.79% return currently. The end of year performance will be in, of course, the final accounts report, so we're expecting that after the start of the next financial year. Capital reserves, March 24, it was 6.4 million, and at the end of the medium-term financial plan, the 5-year period is expected to be 1.5 million. So we're aiming to deliver without borrowing on capital and give our level of reserves over the next 3 financial years. At least there is no need to borrow given that level of reserves that we have. Service investments for us is shares in the Malvern Hills Science Park in partnership with Worcester County Council and the Worcester Chamber of Commerce. In there we've got 9% voting and non-voting shares. The P1 and P2 is in the report, with dividends pertaining to those of 3% and 6.37%. Our commercial investments are in Tenbury Business Park. We've got 518,000 in that, and that yields 46,000. Spring Court, 670,000 in that yields 45,000. Spring Lane, 777,000, yielding 52%. This portfolio actually has been assessed, and the underlying assets are deemed to provide a sufficient security of the capital invested. The SIPFA Prudential Code for Capital Finance set limits to ensure investments are affordable, prudent and sustainable, and this sets limits on external debt. However, our debt is zero, and we aim to remain so over the next 5 financial years, or 3 financial years, for however long we are going to remain as a district council. So essentially that's the strategy for the 25-26 period to be recommended to council for adoption. Shall I take any questions on that? Okay, I propose that we recommend that. Can we take a vote on that?
That's unanimous again, Chair.
Right, the next item 10, is the Community Infrastructure Levy principal approval for the funding of areas of informal recreation. So who's going to take that? Is that David?
I don't know because my name wasn't put on it. You doing it?
Apologies about that, Councillor Harrison. So this is just for the principal approval for SIL fund to go for the areas of informal recreation. So we haven't brought actual locations or amounts. It is for the recommendation that it can be looked into, that SIL funding can go towards these areas, and that the Community Infrastructure Officers Group, which currently deal with Section 106 at the moment and work out, manage the Section 106 grant funding schemes, that they will look at the locations of and costings of up to 2 airs, which will be financed through SIL. As part of the report, it also mentions the Community Infrastructure Investment Plan, which will be coming to the exec committee next month, and that the Community Infrastructure Officers Group will be able to, as part of the recommendation, look into using some of that SIL money for any shortfalls in spend for some of the projects that they might be putting forward as part of that document. So that is the recommendations in a nutshell.
David.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Just in case there was nobody going to do it, I'll read what I've put. This is to do obviously with this community infrastructure levy. I found it very difficult to originally find out what this paper was all about, but I'll give you a summary of it as follows. And I'm sure that Isabel at the back will no doubt pull me up if I'm wrong. In the SWDPR, there are 3 AIRs allocated and mentioned, of which one was in Malvern Hills and 2 within Wychavon. One within Malvern Hills and one of the 2 within Wychavon have been withdrawn by the landowners. These AIRs are areas of informal recreation and are required to try to reduce the damage caused to other areas, and in particular with us, the Malvern Hills itself, by introducing further large areas close to residents to become recreation areas and places where they can walk. Officers investigating with the policy team find that there was not enough funding for these areas to be converted for recreation. SIL money has been accumulated from developers for distribution between the 3 councils. The local parish and town councils still get their proportion, either 10% or 25% of the SIL, 25% if they have a neighbourhood plan, and the rest of it was originally pooled. As one of the funding things, that pots that goes into section 123, was it 123? Has been discontinued, and so these have been split. So it's quite interesting. It's been agreed by the 3 councils that the money collected in their own council areas can now be spent in their own council area. Quite pleased about that. To get the areas of informal recreation, then it's preferred that this funding, which can only be spent on community facilities, helps to assist the funding of these areas. The recommendation at 2.1.1 approves the in-principle allocation of this money start-up costs. The SWDPR examination papers number 32 and 33, both published on the 2nd of January, are specifically on this topic, and you do get quite a lot of information from that. But I am assured that the areas that are recommended on those two papers, 32 and 33, are not necessarily the ones that are going to go forward. So anyway, I fully support this, as I say, recommendation 2.1, so we can spend it in our own patch. Now comes the crunch. 2.1 part 2. This recommendation is for the officers group to oversee the strategic and proposed airs, and then details of costs will be brought back to the executive committee before these funds are released. The only thing that I'm concerned about here, and it's for members to decide that are here today, not really me, is should any councillor or councillors sit on this committee?
Thanks, Chair. You know, in general, I'm certainly supportive of this recommendation. In terms of the areas of informal recreation, has there or is the intent to do some sort of broader public consultation in terms of need, both with members of the public, but I'm also thinking of, for example, the National Landscapes team, the Malvern Hills National Landscapes team. Obviously, there's pressure on the National Landscapes to, you know, explore the opportunities to relieve pressure on, for example, those National Landscapes, and to look a little bit more strategically at where these can be located according to need, and where maybe pressure can be relieved on existing landscape assets and existing areas of informal recreation, for example.
Thank you, through you, Chair. I will try and answer your questions, but forgive me if I haven't got them all down. So it might be best for Andy to say about whether the committee group should include councillors on it, but I'm aware that obviously that is something that councillors will discuss a bit later on. With the broader public consultation point that you raised, as part of the South Worcestershire Development Plan review, there's a number of evidence documents that have been undertaken as part of the process. And one of the documents, which is by Footprint Ecology, went into detail about how the existing Malvern Hills SSSI is being eroded through existing use, and will therefore, you know, have exacerbated erosion issues through future development that's proposed to be happening through the SWDPR. Now, the SIL money that we have has been collected under the existing local plan, so the 2016 SWDP, so has to be spent on infrastructure related to the SWDP. Because that document, although it's an evidence document for the SWDPR, went into detail about how future development would impact the Malvern Hills SSSI, because it said about the existing erosion due to the current development that's happened under the SWDP, that's how we're able to potentially create an air or a number of airs around in the zone of interest of the Malvern Hills SSSI, which covers most of the national landscape, using the existing SIL money. The future areas which are discussed in the SWDPR, the review that we're taking through at the moment through examination. Money is expected to come through either by the Section 106 that is brought forward through new development, through potential looking at the SIL going forward. We'll have to update the SIL charging schedule relating to the new SWDPR, and any money from that could look at future airs that would be specifically to help with any of the impacts from future development. So it's more looking at the current issues that we have on the Malvern Hills SSSI from existing development that has happened, which we have collected SIL on since 2017. So public consultation has in effect been undertaken through the consultation of the SWDPR, but not on the specifics of areas that we're looking at to fund through the existing SIL. It could be something that we do take forward, but it's probably something that this Community Infrastructure Officers Group need to first of all look into potential locations, costs, and then we could go out and do consultations on where they could be located. But until we know that, we wouldn't be able to give any more details on what's required. But it could be something that's included in the recommendations. Hopefully that's kind of answered both of your questions, potentially.
Jules.
Thank you, Councillor Gallagher. Isabel, can I just clarify something, because the Madresfield site, which was in the proposed SWDPR, which is no longer available to us, presumably these two airs will also pick up on the need for recreational space as a result of the SWDPR allocations as well, or am I wrong with that? Is it purely existing? Because the report seemed to say it was both. My thought was that the reason why this has come to us now, and Izzy, you might want to go back and check this, because you might not. I wouldn't want you to say something you don't want to say or you're not sure of. My thought was that this was coming now because we need to show to the inspectors that actually we have got plans for delivering these recreational spaces, and it's sort of one of the pieces of the jigsaw for the examination in public. So that was my thinking. I'm not sure if that's right, so I'm not sure if you could answer that, Isabel, but if not, I'm very happy for it to be taken away, or I'll have a word with Ian, I don't mind. But that was my thought, that was why this report was coming now, because we're at a crucial point in the SWDPR process. Sorry, David, I don't know if you want to add to that.
If I can, Mr. Chairman, I was also under that impression, and in conversations that I have had, this had to come forward before so it was available for the inspector as to how the money was going to be spent. I didn't read it that it was really to do with SWDP that we'd already got. I thought it was probably to spend the money from the SWDP that we've got, which is obviously accumulating because there's still money coming in, and will still be money coming in for probably another 2 years, looking at the way, some of these are going. I just feel that it just worries me. But of course, Madresfield pulled out because they couldn't make it pay. This is obviously a means to make it pay, but whether, sort of think that would appeal to them, I don't know. The two, that I was worried about, because they're both on the side of the hills. They're both very close to Malvern Hills itself. Okay, they are smaller, but I really don't know. But I was also under that impression that it had got to go and got to be through today, more or less, to meet the SWDPR inspector's target.
Let's come back again. I think it's fine, and I would personally propose that we go with the officer recommendation. I'd just like a bit of clarification behind the scenes. I think David probably would as well. just so that we're clear. Sorry, Vic.
So just to help, rather than hold things up today, if we can approve the reports and the recommendations as they are, and then offline, I think certainly you two would appreciate a bit more information around the background and whatever. So we can arrange for that to happen. But I think rather than hold things up, if members are so minded, let's approve the recommendations and then take offline the further information that's been requested.
I don't see why we have to decide who's on the committee today. Doesn't make any difference who's on the committee. I'd sooner that recommendation 2.2 or 2.1 part 2 is left, because it doesn't matter. That's I think that's an immaterial, but Andy may be able to help us with that.
Thank you, Chair. I think, to be honest, the salient point of recommendation 2 is the last sentence. Who does the work is irrelevant, and largely you'd expect officers to do the work, but that would include obviously Kieran, and it may include Ian, and it would include the portfolio holder. The salient part of that recommendation is before we commit any expenditure, those plans will have to come here to be voted on.
Thanks, Chair. I think those points, valid points aside, the other link obviously in this report is the direct link to the Community Infrastructure Fund, which in essence is the vehicle or the mechanism of which we're going to get some of this money out of the door. So in terms of timing, it's quite key that if we make this decision today and we bring in an exec report in March that then gives that mechanism, is that we actually start spending this money. Obviously SIL isn't exclusively the only part of funding that will go towards the Community Infrastructure Fund, but there certainly will be lots of projects in the pipeline that may or may not qualify as AIRs in the sense that we'll be looking to expand and enhance facilities for benefit of use. And if you think about the constraints that we have now around times, it's also important that we do look to what is achievable that we can see through to its end before this council, you know, obviously ceases. So I think the point about public consultation, it's worth saying, is that, and you will see when the report comes through, and some of those on PDP have seen it already, is our officers have very close relationships with organisations and communities across the district, and we know where the demand and the need is coming from. You know, we're being asked, can you help us, you know, enhance our facilities and create more recreational space? Granted, that looks different across the district, but it's really important that we get this decision made so that that can see through that process, that we have the funds, we have the mechanism, and we can start to do some of this work. So I just wanted to make that very clear, and of course in terms of consultation we can do more, and I'm always keen to do more, but I just want to put with a caveat is what we also don't want to do is slow down our ability to actually make community impact on this.
Have we got a proposal or any other comments to be made?
I'll give you another comment first. This is specific money that is allocated under SIL. Got nothing to do with Section 106 money or anything like that, which comes from developers. This is purely money that used to be under the Regulation 123, which was abolished, I think, last year or the year before, one or the other. This was a means now that we can sort of go ahead to sort of allocate some of it. As far as these AIRs are concerned, although we need some means of what's going to happen, they haven't got any yet. So they've got to buy them, or somebody's got to buy them, or somebody's got to agree to doing them up or making them into areas of informal recreation. So this is going to be 3, 4, 5 years down the line, I believe.
Do we have a proposal for this?
I made a proposal for 2.11, but I haven't made a proposal for 2.1 part 2.
Mark. So we take a vote on that?
So
We'll have to split it up now because obviously we've had proposals and seconders. Yes. So, yeah.
Okay, you want to
I think it'd be easier if we just split them up so that it's clear if that's okay with members and the proposals and seconders. So if we take the recommendation on 2.11 first. That approves in principle the allocation of SIL monies to the start-up costs of up to 2 areas of informal recreation within Malvern Hills district to include purchase of the land where necessary. So if you can raise your voting cards, please, members, those in favour. That's unanimous on 2.1, Chair. So if we can then move to 2.2, so the proposal is to approves the Community Infrastructure Officers Group to oversee the strategy of the proposed areas, and then with the detailed costs to be brought back through the Executive Committee before the SIL funds are finally released. So if again, if you can... I think, yes, it's been proposed and seconded. So again, if you could raise your voting cards, please, members. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That's 10 for. Anyone against, please? Any abstentions? That's the motion's carried with 1 abstention.
We now move on to item 11, which is the referred notice of motion. Executive Committee is asked to consider the notice of motion referred from the Council on the 28th of January. So I think I want to take this in sort of 2 chunks. The first one is to propose the statement that the Executive Committee instructs the Chief Executive to write to the Government on behalf of the Council to ask it to think again about the impact that the proposed inheritance tax changes will have on small and medium-sized farms, and that it finds another way to target institutional and private landowners who buy farmland seeking to shelter their wealth from taxation that does not penalise small and medium-sized farms.
That's not the notice of motion that was referred to Executive Committee.
I think John's making a new proposal in response to the recommendation.
My understanding, having taken advice before this meeting, that amendments cannot be made to it. It needs to be discussed as referred from full council.
So, yeah, that's correct. The recommendation is that it just needs to be considered. So once considered, you can then propose, is my understanding.
Okay, it's not what I was advised by the monitoring officer.
I had a note from the monitoring officer on it because I did actually ask the same question.
We can open it up for discussion now, Chair. You've made a proposal.
So it's for it.
What does, sorry, the alternative proposal or the substantive notice of motion? It doesn't say that.
I can only advise you on what I've been informed.
If you're making an alternative proposal, is that what you're doing, John? Can you please repeat that? I'm not sure I'm in agreement with it at the moment.
No, I can't take it in.
We haven't got it in writing.
I've got it in writing. It's supposed to be in writing.
If there's an amendment, usual practice is that an amendment is sent around to committee members to read, not verbalised.
We can adjourn while we go.
We'll adjourn the meeting so you can have copies.
So we've jumped ahead then. We should have heard the original substantive notice of motion. We were under the impression that the original notice of motion was going to be proposed by the leader this evening. So that's where things have come unstuck, as you say. No, that's not what you're doing then. You're proposing an alternative motion. Exactly, we've jumped ahead a step.
Okay, we shall reconvene. Let's move back. At the council meeting the 28th of January 2025, Councillor Allen moved and called with Councillor Malcolm Victory seconded the following notice of motion, and the words are there in item 1.1. Could I propose prior to the discussion, just make a proposal that the wording that we have put a proposal forward is that the executive committee instructs the chief executive to write to the government on behalf of the council to ask it to think again about the impact that the proposed inheritance tax changes will have on small and medium-sized farms, and that it finds another way to target institutional and private landowners who buy farmland seeking to shelter their wealth from taxation that does not penalise small and medium-sized farms. Okay, I propose that.
No.
Have a seconder? Okay.
You've still got to.
Yeah, we've still got to discuss that.
So we need to do that then, I think.
Yeah.
I think the, I mean, there's actually two parts to this motion. There's the one part that says let's send a message to the government around the farmers' taxation, and there's a second part around continuing to fund a community builder. And I think those two probably need to be taken separately. We did have a look, and I believe, and the portfolio holder will probably talk a bit about this, but the rural community builder, I think, is funded for fiscal 26 already. And we do have a concern, I think, from a financial planning perspective, to say, do we want to pass a motion that effectively guarantees a job for life? Because that's what this potentially says. We'll continue to fund the rural community builder. So I'm not sure that rural community builder is relevant for this motion. So it might have been better if that wasn't part of the motion. And I know at the time it was talked about pulling that out. Sorry.
Yes.
So it's in the you just read it out. It's in the motion. So no, I'm sorry. Okay. So going to the substantive motion, one of my challenges around the council is where we put just political motions in front of council to make statements that are relevant to our communities, but are really made at making a political point. And this one in particular, I don't think there's many councillors who would not support our farmers. And it's the way that we want to support those farmers that's different. So this motion is saying, what the Labour government has said is, we'll support our farmers by introducing IHT, but we'll protect those with £1 million. Now, I think the Labour government is also saying, if you've got a husband and wife farming team, that doubles up, so it's 2 million. And then adding on top of that, you've got the local householders allowance. So actually, you're at 3 million before you get there. So what this motion is really saying is, 3's not enough, we want 5. And I think that's splitting hairs, unless the motion is saying actually it's 5 million per farmer, in which case, then if you add in the wife, then that's, or the husband, that takes you up to 10, plus the million allowance, that's 11. So I'm not clear what the motion's actually saying as presented. I think putting a value in there actually ruins it for me. And if it's 11 million that we're trying to protect, because it's not clear in the motion, I know that the Green Party policy is also about introducing a wealth tax on everything over 10 million. So for a farmer, they're saying, we're not going to take it off you in inheritance tax. We'll just take 1% of your income or the value of your assets every year going forward. So by putting a value in there, we make it party political. Not only make it party political, we make it Green Party political. So I think, I don't have a problem. I have a problem with the rural community builder part that was in the original motion. I don't have a problem supporting the farmers. I don't want 5 million in there, and I would prefer this to be amended so that there isn't a reference to an amount, that it is only 5 million. And if we can agree an alternate wording, I think we could probably get unanimous support on this.
So what, I'm sorry, what are we doing? Are we debating this original notice of motion and pulling holes in it like Councillor Owenson has done and making political points? Or are we debating your amended version? I'm still not clear. Okay, so the reason that this was deferred to this committee was because it mentioned it had resource implications. Okay, Councillor Allen then offered to withdraw that part of the motion and have it heard as in two halves, just as Councillor Owenson said he would prefer it to have been heard. That request was actually declined by the chair, despite the fact that Emma and some of her colleagues had sat through the whole meeting after coming to speak to us. The chair knew he was going to defer it, and still they sat through that meeting, which I think is a very unjust use of their time, and actually they deserve an apology for. No one in this room, I don't think, would have had a problem with, as is, Councillor Allen's motion, and I wouldn't want to hear people's views actually now, because I would have thought that we were all in support of that. You know, it has been politicised, unfortunately, not by us, Councillor Owenson. It was the Green Party that brought this notice of motion, as you well know. And there's no point in discussing what our policies might and might not be outside of this chamber. We're not whipped. We respond to notices of motion and policies as they come before us. We don't have a standardised view, unlike some other political parties. So please, can we debate the motion as deferred, as it says in the paperwork? The executive committee considers the notice of motion, which is in its entirety, actually, because that's how it was deferred. Yeah, happy to hear views.
Have we got any comments from any of the executive committee on this? We're going to discuss this item as per the original wording.
Thank you, Chair. Now, there are a few points that I wish to make. First of all, just to thank Emma for spending what seems to be an incredible amount of time coming to this council. And members will know that I've often found our processes frustrating, so I can only imagine how you might feel. So I do feel compelled to apologise, and I think we probably could have handled this much better. But that aside, there are some very important points to this motion, and I do believe actually that the point about a community builder is important, because it's about what support we're offering to our rural and farming communities for the future. So just to clarify, and as Councillor Owen has said, is we do have a fully funded community builder that supports rural communities that remains in post until 2026. We do need to undertake a review around our community builders as a whole, because some of those posts will naturally be coming to their funding end this year. And what I have discussed with Councillor Allen after that full council meeting is that I am happy to have a conversation with members in various forums about what the future of community builders overall looks like, particularly again in the context that, you know, we need to be mindful of the time frames we're working to. The model that we have may not be the model that we take forward, but I'm absolutely committed to you know, helping our communities have community builders if that's what they would like to continue to do, and certainly to work with the NFU or any supporting organisation that wants to do that. So I hope that's just categorically clear that there is a firm commitment to keep our post and to continue that conversation with Councillor Allen members and our community partners. I guess on the wider substantive point, and you know, it's been said a couple of times, this isn't about politics. Well, it is, because politics is about choices, and whether I choose to support a motion also comes down putting politics aside to morally where I stand on this. I represent Longdon as a rural community, so a huge amount of farmers are affected by what this Labour government has introduced. And in fact, some of those farmers in my community have been out campaigning against this tax, and that's what I've supported personally, and lots of members of the Conservative group have been doing over the last few months. And I cannot fundamentally agree to put forward a motion where I don't believe in what they're doing. And, you know, it is about choices, and I do think that we should pressurise the government to rethink it. I certainly know the Conservative government were criticised lots of times for making U-turns, but U-turns are where you listen, you recognise it might not be the right thing, and you make a choice to make a change. And I think given that the County Council in Worcestershire and the MP in Worcestershire has both written and lobbied government to reconsider, I think that a unified position for Worcestershire would be a much stronger one. And so therefore I would support an amendment that puts that in writing, is that we don't think this is the right decision for farmers full stop, and that they should go back to square one and have a rethink about how they approach the issue that they're wishing to tackle. So I hope that summarises my position both on builders, on the substantive motion, my willingness to obviously hopefully find some agreement with members here on being able to write to the government, but I do think that we need to recognise that members will come at this not just from party politics but also morally where they stand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I quite understand it is very emotive and what have you right across the board and across the whole country. Generally, I'm in support of what the intentions are. But I call on our Deputy Chief Executive, who's, I assume, sat at the back still. The Executive Committee is a committee that's set up to decide really about spending, as far as I am aware. In this particular proposal, as is, and I didn't know there was another one being brought forward, but I'm going to read what I put down. It's only 8 small lines in large print. I do not believe that the rural community builder comment at the end of this notice of motion should be included, and a separate discussion should be had on this particular part of this proposal for the future. As we have no details supplied to us in the paragraph, what are the financial and resource implications in approving this part of the notice of motion? Could make this position permanent, which I think Jeremy's already said, and also with an unspecified salary. So I'm not in favour of that part of this notice of motion. That's where I stand.
If the exec have finished making comment, I think if we can come up with the wording along with the lines that John Gallagher's talked about, that says that we're against the tax and we're looking for ways for the government to look at other ways to target the institutional and private investors. That's actually a move from our perspective as well. You know, we're just saying get rid of the tax. I think it's quite a good compromise, and on the basis that he's still happy to propose it, I'm happy to second that as a combined position across the exec, rather than the issue around the rural community builder and the issue around the 5 million.
Just to pick up on some of the comments made about costs, there are details in the agenda papers in relation to the costs of the community builders and the rural community builder. You know, maybe we should have taken them separately, and that's when we could have proceeded at the last full council meeting in that respect, but we were not allowed to do that, so we wouldn't be here again tonight. Pardon, Beverly. I heard you say something. Right, okay. So come up with some wording and let's see what we think then. I'm not happy with it coming from the Chief Executive though. I want the Chair to write to government.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Now, I'm in a difficult position both ways. I'm torn terribly. Because, okay, we've got a funded rural builder, community builder, that's good. But there are dozens and dozens of other ways that this council and its powers and authorities can assist our farming and rural communities, whether that's in agriculture, horticulture, forestry or whatever. A more pragmatic approach to planning, farm diversification, the ability to actually build retirement homes on the same land that you own so that families can move about. There are lots of other things that we can do to help our communities that we have power to do, and we don't because, oh, it doesn't fit in with the national planning policy, or it's not sustainable, and I can go on and on and on. But I've got half a dozen changing hat clients already lining up to put their land into companies so that there is no inheritance tax to be paid because the company will last forever. So we're already shifting the playing fields by what's happening. Now, all this is flummery. It's flummery. We can change things at a drop of a hat with a vote. What we need to do is do practical things to help our communities, whether they're small little hobby farms, retirement farms, people that are farming from an environmental point of view, or the big commercial farms. All of them are there for a reason. There is no other business in the world that works on a return of less than 1%. They rely on the capital asset and what they're going to pass to the next generation. And this is almost verging on class warfare, or warfare on our community. They're nitpicking at other things. The hunting, shooting, fishing lobby. The fact that you cannot get a blinking shotgun license. The fact you can't use certain chemicals in food production. The fact that you cannot use certain rat poisons. All these things fall into our community. And there are things we could do. If we've got money available, why aren't we thinking about... And we've got another section in which already discussed about environmental enhancement and recreation. We could fund more footpath officers. There is a huge network of footpaths that are not looked after. They're blocked or are not usable. That could be funded. So all this could be adapted and could be changed. And we have powers to do so. And we don't, because, certain powers that say we can't, or central government says we can't. We haven't got funds to do it. Well, it's about to all change. And my instinct is, if we can drop out rural community builder, which we've already told is funded, and change the limit on £5 million, because £5 million in agriculture still doesn't go very far. A 100-acre ring-fence farm can easily run to £2.5 to £3 million before you've even started to stock it. So I'm, generally speaking, your proposals are perfectly okay. Just let's vote on doing something where the chief executive and the leader of the council, and I'll write a letter too, right? Saying, you've got to drop this. You've got to drop this because you are affecting how people go to sleep tonight, what they hand to their children, how they structure their families, and how they're going to invest. They will stop investing in the countryside. They will stop investing in jobs. They will stop investing in training. It all has a knock-on effect. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'll rest my case.
Mark. So I know Jules wants to come in, but I'm hearing that we're coming from the same perspective. I'm sure we can find a compromise here. I think if the community builder issue is causing some concern, why don't we just leave that aside in Martin's original proposal and vote on Martin's original proposal based on taking out the community builder. Then we can go to John's proposal and vote on that as two separate things and see where we go. If the first one doesn't go through, then we'll vote on the second one. That would be my proposal.
Chair, would you mind if I just clarified something? Because I've got the order at the moment that you proposed first, and I believe that Councillor Owenson seconded your wording. So that is actually first before we can then look at whether we are amending then back to the original that's in the papers. Is that correct? Thank you. Just to confirm that.
Could I just make a proposal along? I'm getting very confused now because I'm not very good with notices of motion, I'm afraid. But it seems to me that one of the things we're debating is whether we basically support a community builder ad infinitum at whatever cost, which I know is sort of in the report. Is there a way of saying, and to pick up on Douglas's point, is there a way of saying something along the lines that we will find ways or research ways or come up with a strategy to support our farmers? I'm not sure, because I'm not a farmer, and I don't know, it just seems that that's a bit of a sticking point. But Community Builders is rightly only one means of supporting the farmers. You know, and there are other ways, as Douglas has mentioned a few, you know, encouraging farm diversification, all those sorts of things. I'm just wondering if we can find a slightly different form of words that put something in. Jenny, you might have something, I don't know.
I wouldn't say I have an exact form of words, but I think there's some validity in committing to continue conversations with the NFU, supported by our community builder, to identify what supports or what actions we could take as a council. Maybe that's a piece of work that can be developed through PDP, and the members can have a greater look at it. But I do absolutely agree with Douglas's points, and I'm very conscious that we could take a decision to say, yes, it's a community builder that's needed for the future, but that may not be actually what's needed. So, you know, I think the commitment has to be around continuing the conversation and really reviewing what is it we can do in the time frame we're available to support our communities now and afterwards in terms of sustainability and need. And, you know, that could be a whole range of things, but it's a piece of work.
Martin, you come in. Yes, thank you, Chair. Good evening, Council. We wouldn't be having this problem tonight if we'd simply discussed the motion and it had been agreed that the lines that were most contentious, which I was quite prepared to withdraw, and would have been quite reasonable to withdraw, were withdrawn, and we could have debated the motion. I'm sure everybody would have supported the farmers. That's what I'm about. I don't like the fact that it has been tonight introduced party politics into this by mentioning the Green Party. At no stage of my motion do I mention party politics at all. And in fact, sorry, did you say something? Yeah. I did say you mentioned the Labour government. I'm talking about the Labour government. I'm talking about party politics locally. And interestingly, at the full county council meeting in January, the Green Party supported the Conservative motion, which is very, very similar to this. We didn't play party politics with this. We played for the farmers. I understand people have concerns about a level, and people say perhaps 5 million is too low. Well, let's be realistic here. The Labour government have just brought in a tax with a threshold of £1 million. If anybody here thinks that they're going to abolish it overnight, they're not. And I suggest if the Conservative Party get back into power next time, they won't abolish it either. They'll change the threshold, but they won't abolish it. I'll be amazed. So a £5 million limit is a good starting point. It takes virtually all your tenant farmers and the vast majority of farmers out of the equation. It's more likely the Labour government may be prepared to accept something like that, rather than what I consider is a really sort of weak, wishy-washy political compromise that you've proposed, Mr. Chairman, which is simply to get certain members of your administration out of the hole. And I hope instead you'll agree that my motion should go forward, be voted upon, and we can remove the part about the rural funding community builder, because I can see the problems there. But the rest of it, we should get a letter signed by our chairman, whichever political party he might be in this week, and we get it sent to our Labour government. Thank you.
Jeremy, you want to come in?
A couple of points on what Councillor Allen's just said, and then I want to pick up on the potential to add the substantive. The party politics here is absolutely being played by the Greens, and that statement there was a classic party political statement against Labour and against members of this council. So the point about the Greens supporting the county motion is correct. Unfortunately, the Greens didn't support the Conservative Party motion in Parliament.
Point of order, Chair.
December.
That's not relevant to this discussion.
Sorry, he's just talked about supporting a motion at county council, and I'm not allowed to say that you didn't support the motion at Parliament.
Because you're misrepresenting what was said deliberately, as you did in the press before the last full council meeting.
So the Greens didn't support it in Parliament, and the Greens also didn't support it at the London mayoral elections when the Conservatives also brought a motion. You can make this a political issue. I think the issue that we're trying to get to is to say we don't agree with the introduction of the inheritance tax. We've got a proposal here that says rethink, which I think is what we want the government to do. And I think we to build in the point about the support that the local council can deliver for the local farmers. I think if we can get some wording added, I think you might have drafted something based on what Jenny said. I'd be happy to, once I've heard it, to accept that as a substantive change to the motion that I've already seconded.
So, if I can summarise where we're at, so we have we've debated the issue. We have a proposal which has been seconded, which has been circulated around the chamber, and that's we're at a point where we can maybe vote on that. We have a second issue to do with the rural community builder, where which has not been formally proposed and seconded at this stage, but is along the lines of continuing conversations with the NFU, re-supporting the farming community, what the council can do to further support the farming community. So, there's two elements to this. The first element has been proposed and seconded. The second one hasn't at this stage.
So I'm happy to accept that amendment if John's happy to accept that amendment.
So it's an amendment, but it's effectively an addition to the original proposal by way of an amendment which says something on the lines of we will commit to continuing conversations with the NFU, re-supporting the farming community, looking at what the council can do to support the farming community. Words to that effect. We'll finesse that, but that's the essence of it. So if that second bit can be amended, if John's happy to accept that amendment, and Jeremy's seconding it, then I think we can move to vote on this, Chairman.
Sorry, for clarity, through you, Chair, which are we voting on now?
You are now voting on an amended proposal, which the proposer has agreed to amend, which is along the lines of what's printed in front of you, plus the piece of paper I've just circulated. With an amendment to that along the lines of conversations with the NFU regarding supporting what the council can do to further support the farming community.
Might I suggest that just talking to the NFU is a bit restrictive? You might want to talk to other relevant organisations. It's too much onus on the NFU, really.
So as a rough draft suggestion, exec commits to work with our existing rural community builder members, NFU and other organisations to consult on the future of the role and explore other ways to provide support to farmers and rural communities. Something to that effect.
I want to come on a point of order first. When we started this debate, our legal advice, who sat in front of us, said that the first job we have to do is to discuss and vote on the substantive motion. That has now changed, has it?
No, I said that there should be discussion. There was a proposer and second, which was seconded, so I've said that comes first. That vote must be made. Now, my understanding now is we've got the same motion coming forward with further amendments, which the proposer and seconder have both agreed that they're happy to change. So that comes first before we then look at anything else, because we've actually got that proposed and seconded.
So just to clarify, your original statement that we have to discuss the notice of motion as was submitted at the meeting is now not true.
I did say that it had to be, that there was a debate that took place and Chair did invite debate on that, but that there was not a proposer and seconder to that, that the Chair actually put a proposal forward and that was seconded by Councillor Owenson. So that has to come first on the voting. I'm just going to read this out so that everybody actually, so we've got the original part that was proposed by Chair. The Executive Committee instructs the Chief Executive to write to the Government on behalf of the Council to ask it to think again about the impact that the proposed inheritance tax changes will have on small and medium-sized farms, and that it finds another way to target institutional and private landowners who buy farmland seeking to shelter their wealth from taxation that does not penalise small and medium-sized farms, and also that exec commits to work with our existing rural community builder, members of the NFU and other organisations to consult on the future of the role and explore other ways to provide support to farmers and rural communities. So that is what we are now voting on. Okay, so if I can move to the vote on that, is that okay, Chair? So those in favour, if you can raise your voting cards, please. Any against? That motion's carried, Chair. No, there was 10.
Well, item 12, exclusion of press and public.
Sorry, public.
The committee is invited to consider making the following resolution to exclude the public and press in respect of the next item in view of the likely disclosure of exempt information.
Just press the button.
Not unless they're on exempt.
Resolve that in accordance with the provisions of section 100A brackets 4 of the Local Government Act 1972, the public and press be excluded from the meeting during the consideration of the following business on the grounds that it involves the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 3 of part 1 of schedule 12A to the Act.